A man awakens from a long, long dream. He had been hoping that those who would rouse him from his slumber to be as well off as his forebears, a society worthy to surpass Alag. What he saw, however, was nothing of the sort. A ruined world devastated by the most brutal calamity seen to date. One can only wonder what he might have felt in that moment: disgust, dread, or disappointment. However, these people had a plan 200 years in the making, a crazy plan involving manipulation of both the rift and even time itself. Generations worth of people had labored hard to undo the disaster that destroyed the world. It was a huge undertaking, and no one knew if it would work for sure, but the man had all the faith. After all, how could he fail after the people of that doomed world invested so hard into a brighter future for a world they won't ever experience themselves? With these hopes, the man gets carried onto another world at another point in time, yet this one is not much different from the last. A dying world on the brink of collapse, one fated for oblivion when the 8th Umbral Calamity came, a fate that he was supposed to fight against. To devise a plan to save this world and to keep it from falling into disarray for nearly a century would be nothing short of a miracle. But he had a source to provide this enormous strength of will, the stories of a legend and a hero whose unfaltering courage acted as his guiding light. This magnificent spire that seemingly reached to the very heavens inspired hope in the surrounding people, and they started to build around it. The tower's gatekeeper would come to be called the Crystal Exarch, whose strong leadership formed the pillars for the society. It took many decades, but it would eventually blossom into a beautiful city that serves as humanity's last bastion from the dreadful Sin Eaters, the Crystarium. Yet, in the grand scheme of things, this was but a feeble spark next to the absolute state of despair this world was in. Countless children lost their parents to these monstrosities, and as someone who himself had been separated from his parents, the Exarch was sympathetic to these children and issued an initiative where orphans from nearby villages would be taken into the Crystarium. He personally took in one such orphan to his care, a young Viera named Lyna. The Exarch showed a lot of compassion when raising her, and she came to think of him fondly as her grandpa. The Crystarium eventually created their own city guard to better protect the nearby villages from Sin Eaters, and Lyna would become captain of the guard. Though it took many decades, the Exarch had accomplished much in making this world a better place, but his work was far from over. After a painfully long wait, the time had finally come to call upon his hero to save this world. Soon he would throw wide the gates. Today we'll be talking about G'raha Tia, the character who is simultaneously a goofy number 1 fan of yours, as well as an extremely competent leader, and of course, yet another beloved character in the story. He's definitely an interesting character because I don't think anyone expected them to take this throwaway character in a side story and like 5 years later turn him into a major character in another expansion. Natsuko Ishikawa, the person who wrote both the Crystal Tower and Shadowbringer storylines, spoke in an interview about how they didn't know at the time if A Realm Reborn would have any continuation, such as more expansions, so she wrote that ending to the Crystal Tower to be definitive. But it still had that little room for a follow-up, and she jumped to that opportunity in Shadowbringers. So when you think about G'raha Tia's character, his involvement in A Realm Reborn was such that they did the bare minimum enough to spark interest and get some fans to like him, so that there could be a potential follow-up. In that sense, the idea to expand his story was always there, simply waiting to be told. I think that's awesome. It sets a nice precedent where just because a character seemingly has offered all there is to offer in the story, they could come back in an entirely another way at a later date, which I think is exciting. And G'raha Tia very much set that precedent, and it's something that FF14 does really, really well with its storytelling. I think it was especially effective thinking back to the release of Shadowbringers. I remember people seeing the trailer and there was a lot of debate. Some were like, that's definitely G'raha Tia, who else is so prominently featured in the Crystal Tower questline? while others were like, nah, it can't be him. And even thinking back to pre-5.3 when the Crystal Tower was purely optional, yeah, you didn't actually need to finish that questline to enter Shadowbringers. That's why G'raha Tia's character is written in a way that you can appreciate him without any prior knowledge in Shadowbringers, which I think is a great way of doing it. Reward those who went out of their way, but you can still find enjoyment if you didn't. Something that also makes G'raha Tia really stand out is that he's really the embodiment of your character's influence on people. There are countless characters in the story, both minor and major, that are inspired by the Warrior of Light's virtues, but G'raha Tia is that taken to its very extreme. This man lived through absolute hell and had to make many painful choices, but what kept him going was your awesomeness and how he cherished the moments in the Crystal Tower storyline.
I cherish the time I spent with you and the others. What I wouldn't give to return to those halcyon days. Chasing ancient secrets, overcoming trial after trial with the aid of like-minded comrades. And what remarkable comrades they were. In such company, I felt as if I were a character in the epic tales that had stirred my heart as a boy, as if my dream had come true.
So, G'raha Tia is introduced to us in the Crystal Tower series. He comes off as this cocky adventurer type at first, but he quickly grows on you as you find out that he isn't really much of an ass. As a matter of fact, he's a pretty good lad and also humble. You then don't see him for a very long time until 4.4, when the Scions fall into this strange comatose state one by one. You then finally meet face to face in 4.5, when he straight up tells you this war with Garlemald is pointless and leads to doom, so you need to come to the first. After either unsubbing or grinding Eureka for a few months, you enter Shadowbringers and there he is, among the first few characters you meet in the new story. Now, may I just say, that's something I realized when I replayed the entirety of Shadowbringers on New Game Plus. When you replay the story, you really come to appreciate this character a lot more, I feel. Because knowing his entire story, you much better understand all of this from his perspective, which is why I wanted to do the intro in the style I did. So let's examine how all of this feels from G'raha Tia's perspective. Consider that he had been waiting for about a whole century to summon you. His biggest motivator was to be even a footnote in your own legend. Now he's finally getting to meet his hero, which should be the best moment in his life, right? But there are two things to consider here. One is that the Warrior of Light is very apprehensive about the situation. In fact, you have straight up multiple mad responses you can give to him, like, take me back to the fight, Xenos is going to kill me, or what the hell did you do to my friends? Do you have any idea how much trouble you caused? Like, can you imagine you have been waiting all this time to meet your hero again, and he's basically flaming you non-stop and not trusting you? But there is an even worse aspect to this. G'raha Tia is deliberately avoiding speaking about himself, his personality, his motives, or even his identity. This is precisely because he knows he is going to sacrifice himself and does not want the Warrior of Light to stop him. So he's trying his best to distance himself, to not get overly attached to them, because the more attached he would be to the Warrior of Light, the more he would have doubts and be unable to go through with his plan. Just think about this, you finally get to meet your idol, the most important person in your life, yet you cannot even form a proper friendship with them. That must have been so hard on G'raha Tia, and you actually see him break at times because he simply cannot pretend and lets his feelings out. This can be seen most prominently in the scene behind the rock, shortly before you enter Mount Goog. You had this instance where he fights alongside you. He's using his Crystal Tower powers while the boss team from Crystal Towers as FF3 plays. How great it must have felt for G'raha Tia to finally be able to fight alongside the Warrior of Light like that. Then, in the scene by the rock, he talks about how he wished he could speak freely to the Warrior of Light, and going on an adventure with them would make him oh so happy. But when you revisit this scene, you realize just how tragic it is. He's essentially telling you his dreams just before he will die and wishes all the happiness to you. It was so emotional when I did it in New Game Plus. I also believe this is the exact point at which the writers wish for most players to put 2 and 2 together regarding his identity. At the end he drops a very obvious hint.
The people of this world have entrusted their hopes to us. We cannot fail them. Nor those who roused me from my slumber.
Anything earlier than this is still just guesswork, but here you can get some concrete connections when you combine the Exarch's admiration for the warrior flight during the solo instance earlier, as well as quite a few earlier points, then immediately following into talking about a person he admires, him talking about being tied to the Crystal Tower, as well as his comment about people rousing him from his slumber. Plus, from a writer's perspective, this is pretty much the perfect time to reveal your hand, as the G'raha Tia reveal is about to come up, meaning it's the optimal point to have the player really start to think about it. So you enter Mount Gulg and G'raha Tia gets his moment, but of course G'raha Tia doesn't die, and this brings me to something I alluded to in the Analysing video about how FF14 approaches G'raha Tia's sacrifice. All the elements were filled for his sacrifice to play out in the story. It was fitting to his character, him being this humble and selfless person. It was very logical as presented by the game, and it would have undone all the damage he caused regarding the Scions and sending them back to the source. Yet, the game takes a stand and says, no, it shouldn't happen, because then you'd simply be taking the easy way out. Of course, FF14 is a tragic game and many characters die, but what it is saying in this scenario is that if you were presented with a choice to sacrifice someone or to try your hardest to keep them from dying, which one would you pick? When you consider patch 5.1, 5.2 and 5.3, they really are about you trying to save one life. Yes, there are a ton of things going on, like learning the true nature of the Echo, stopping Elidibus, learning that we're Azem, learning crucial information about the soul to help cure tempering, cleaning the names of Arpert's crew and so on. But to me personally, what that story arc is at its core is trying your hardest to save G'raha Tia. You go through all this effort just to save him, and I really found myself agreeing with this, especially on my second playthrough. This man had been through so much. He lived through 2 calamities, saved an entire world, lived for hundreds of years, yet his true desire of sharing his adventures with the warrior flight was something he was never able to properly fulfill. His life shouldn't end like this, both because of all he went through, as well as due to him not being able to live out his dream. And more than that, I absolutely found myself loving this message on my replay, to not just accept something that comes at a great cost because it seemingly is the only path. It's essentially saying, you could take the path of least resistance, but if that path comes at a huge cost, then was that path truly worth taking? I think that is a very wholesome message, and it is also why I cannot fathom how many people I saw in 5.3 saying they felt disappointed that G'raha Tia didn't die. To this date, this is the single worst take I heard about this story. Not only is G'raha Tia surviving telegraphed through concrete dialogue saying he would live, such as when you speak to Urianger before leaving the first, but it's also telegraphed thematically. We went through all this effort only to then have him die on the home stretch? Then what the fuck would have been the point? This is a rare scenario of me imposing my opinion so heavily, and I apologize, but I must say this. I think that would have been terrible writing, straight up. Because that's exactly the kind of stuff you see in modern movies and TV series, where they go for the easy shock factor instead of sticking to long-term thematic focus, which is why I strongly disagree with anyone who presented that take. G'raha's character arc is him going from this bloke who really idolizes heroes to then finally committing a noble deed when he locks himself up inside the Crystal Tower. Then, over the course of Shadowbringers, both in the events that took place before we enter Novrand and during it, even though he himself doesn't fully internalize this because he's always downplaying his accomplishments, he himself becomes the very same hero he was dreaming of. At first, he's happy to simply make it as a footnote in the warrior flight's journey and to die after Mount Gulg. But when he's given another chance, he comes to really appreciate life and wants to fulfill his dream of going to an adventure with his hero. And his arc is then completed in 5.3 when he finally becomes a scion of the Seventh Dawn, meaning he could stand with those he saw as legends, but stand with them as equals. But there is something about this particular arc that makes it so memorable. We already discussed the significance of having a character idolizing the Warrior of Light so deeply, but I want to talk more about how it shapes G'raha Tia's character specifically. It just makes a lot of sense that that little adventure you had in the Crystal Tower, combined with your stories in Heavensward and Stormblood, would leave such a profound impact on him, because they are the only positive experiences he could cling to in the aftermath of the 8th Umbral Calamity. And so, in the process of trying to emulate your heroism, he himself becomes the hero he aspired to be. However, it's not only because of the Warrior of Light's influence, much of it was G'raha Tia himself. He was in that special position to cause genuine change, and he took it. I think most people don't realize it, but that sort of a thing takes a lot of courage. He himself later said he could have simply walked away, but he didn't. Though, of course, once again him fanboying the Warrior of Light does come into play, because much of his motivation came from wanting to save them. In the first, he develops a character, the most profound being that he develops his leadership skills, and by the time we see him in Shadowbringers, he has already become an exceptional leader. And there are indeed quite a few scenarios in the story where this becomes apparent. When you start Shadowbringers, the Exarch is like, well, I could tell you about this place, but why don't you go and learn about it yourself?
Such a fight will provide you with far greater insight than any explanation I could offer.
He likes to do this a lot, by the way. He does it again when he's like, this is how you defeat a Light Warden? Oh hey, this village is got assaulted, why don't you see for yourself? Which I like a lot, he kinda enjoys practical teaching. But my main point here is that he tells you which people are the best to speak to understand certain things. This tells us right off the bat that G'raha Tia really understands the people working under him, knows what they do, knows what they're best at, even remembers their personalities to the point he can simply point you to the right places without even thinking about it. If you were to ask him who's selling the best pretzels in town, he would be able to tell you. So he spends time listening and understanding people, knows their strengths and weaknesses, even if he doesn't need to. He could just AFK in the Crystal Tower all day, but he chooses to get involved. That's good leadership. When Ilmor accuses the Crystarium of housing the Warrior of Darkness, he rallies up people to fight Ilmor. What I really love about this scene is that they do such a good point at bringing across the point that people actually trust him. Keep in mind that Ilmor is by far the strongest military force in the world, and they are eager to step into an open conflict with them, and this is purely because they have so much faith in G'raha Tia. There's so much loyalty and camaraderie there. You see this again after the events of Mount Gulg. Even though the situation seems incredibly bleak, the people of the Crystarium, though slightly shaken, are nonetheless determined to keep going, which serves as a testament to the great feat that G'raha Tia accomplished here. People also respect G'raha Tia so much that when he was a captive of Emet-Selch, the people of the Crystarium did not break his one rule of entering the Crystal Tower's spire. If you visit the Crystarium, you'll actually notice he barely has any guards protecting the entrance to the tower. There's only like 2 guys taking shifts there, probably to keep children from entering or some such. He doesn't need to control people with fear, nor does he need to bribe them or any kind of nonsense like that, because people simply respect him. That's powerful. But I would say the most important trait G'raha Tia possesses that makes him such an effective leader is courage. Time and time again in the story, you see his bravery on full display, whether it's facing Ilmor's general and one of the best fighters in the realm head-on, sending a decoy to speak with Watri, leaving the tower to aid in climbing Mount Gulg, and so on. He also has no issues getting himself involved in conflicts and fighting in the front lines, such as in the Hallminster Switch, where you can really see his capability to put on that brave front and remain composed even though everything is going to shit, as he's aiding people and guiding them to safety. He himself describes courage not as the absence of fear, but rather the triumph over it. And yeah, G'raha definitely has triumphed in that regard, and as a result, his courageous nature truly inspires those around him, just as the Warrior of Light's courageous nature had inspired him. So he's competent, he shows a lot of compassion and care towards all his citizens, and is able to lead by example through his bravery and enthusiasm. But the biggest proof of G'raha Tia's leadership aren't even the qualities and traits we see of him throughout the game, but rather, one needs to only take one good look at the Crystarium itself to realize it. Those who watched my Shadowbringers analysis may recall how I described the Crystarium as this near-perfect society that, while it could exist on paper, could never exist in reality, but that it was able to come to fruition because of the very specific circumstances that surrounded the creation of it. And I really want to emphasize that point. The Crystarium is special. It's the only city/nation in all of FF14 that doesn't have a catch or a dark side to it. The way all the cities in FF14 are designed, there are these appealing sides to them and negative sides, which is a good way to make them intriguing, but Crystarium's intrigue is precisely the absence of those negative traits. It's a perfect egalitarian society and it just works, and at its core is G'raha Tia. So you could pretty much say that the Crystarium itself is G'raha Tia's magnum opus, the thing that he can be the most proud of, and the thing that, better than anything, demonstrates his strong leadership. Though I do want to add that in Endwalker, he mentions that his fondness of Charlian served as his inspiration, and you can see some similarities in their foundations. So he didn't of course just conjure this up from thin air, but it doesn't detract from the fact that it was ultimately his leadership that made it endure all this time. So that's the persona that G'raha Tia developed prior to and during the events of Shadowbringers, but it's of course just a mask, which is less than subtly hinted at by how he's wearing a cowl as his Exarch persona. That's why he's so happy in the 5.3 ending. He could finally let go of the burden of leadership and could join as a simple adventurer and kind of just enjoy the ride. It's that thing I talked about in the Alphino video, that leadership is a burden, and oh boy is G'raha Tia happy to have gotten rid of it. And it's then exactly in patches 5.4 and 5.5 where we see G'raha Tia's true personality, that fanboy aspect of him, come out a lot more, and it's so endearing, I love it.
The famous Lys Hext, former scion and hero of the Alamegan resistance. G'raha Tia at your service. I have read much and more about your exploits, Commander. It is a pleasure to finally make your acquaintance. Estinian Wormblood, the Azure Dragoon. He who fought and felled the dread worm Nidhogg at the Warrior of Light's side. To think the day would come when I should see this living legend with my own eyes.
But Endwalker especially did his character a lot of justice because we see him jump back and forth between these two, the badass hero and powerful leader, and the goofy fanboy who keeps idolizing the Warrior of Light and other legendary figures. I think Endwalker especially does a great job at going back and forth between these.
So, shall I cast caution to the wind and try something reckless and dramatic?
Or, to put it simply, you used it to sneak around the Forbidden Archives.
Yes, well, after a fashion. They're tall, you see. The shelves, they're too tall for me. And I could hardly move the library's platforms without attracting attention now, could I? This feels familiar. Well, 'tis good to be... wait. What am I... Gods, don't tell me I fell asleep.
G'raha wove a levitation spell at the last moment. Large enough to catch everyone, it would seem.
Get out of here! Quickly! I won't lose them! Not a one! This will be a brighter future! I won't let a madman's apocalypse ruin everything we've fought to achieve! Enough! You must run. For their sake and your own.
Yes, you will survive. You must.
Be strong, my friends! Fear not, for we will defeat these abominations! Brave men and women of the Radiant Host, lend your Stola and Thancred your aid. Let not a single beast escape. The rest of you, flee this place. Carry the wounded if you must. Head indoors or underground. Above all, stay calm. No beast will follow you. We will see to that.
I especially like those scenes surrounding the final days like in Davnir and in Garland mode. It really shows how much shit G'raha Tia has been through. I mean, this dude survived both the 7th and 8th Umbral Calamity, lived through 2 apocalypses, the other which he played a major role in ending, and now he's playing an integral role in ending his 3rd apocalypse. He's been through a lot, let me tell you that. Now, one final aspect of G'raha's personality I wish to discuss here is how humble he is. He has to be the single humblest character in the entire story. He keeps downplaying his accomplishments over.
Should he indulge me with his tales, I would regale him with my own about my efforts in Northrend, perhaps. Though, ultimately, that tale is more yours than it is mine.
And over.
It hadn't, of course, for I was no hero. Neither then nor after. Though the world to which I awakened and the first were beset with myriad problems, I rarely knew how best to play my part.
And over.
The offer remaineth open.
Well, if you're certain that's what you... I mean, if you think
And over again.
But you needn't bear it alone. Let me share your burden. My, carrying capacity pales in comparison to yours, but I could still help. Shoulder the occasional satchel from your ever-growing mountain of, baggage.
At one point, I even found myself yelling at him like, come on man, could you take a little more credit? I really like an optional bit of dialogue with Y'shtola in 5.3, where she says that G'raha Tia could technically claim the title of Noon, which really just further sells how he's not even using his accomplishments in the first to his advantage. How many of us would flex our balls off? Like, just consider his involvement in the creation of the Crystarium and how big that would look on your CV. Sure, you have no tangible proof of those events, but you have the science to back up your claim, most importantly the Warrior of Light. Like, I'm not gonna lie, if the warrior of light said to me they went to the edge of the universe and defeated despair itself, I'd believe them in a heartbeat. But yeah, G'raha Tia doesn't really flex ever. He just provides his expertise whenever it's needed. Of course, this once again comes back to the discussion of making him a powerful leader, because a humble leader is much preferable to an arrogant one who only drives their own agendas. Now, everyone's always talking about Tancred, Gaius or the Levelier parents, but rarely if ever does G'raha Tia get brought up when it comes to awesome parents in FF14. His relationship with Lyna was one of the most underappreciated parts of Shadowbringers, I felt. It was so good. I loved those stories such as when he made her a cake to make her feel better, or when he was searching all over the tower for her. You really get a sense that, for G'raha Tia, she was probably the other major thing that kept him going, and likewise for Lyna, how she was able to wage this never-ending, unwinnable war against the Sin Eaters for God knows how long, because she had faith in G'raha Tia and the hope brought by his vague plan of one day summoning his hero to this world. It's really something I wished we could have gotten to see more of, but I think the scenes we did get do really well to convey their bond. Their last meeting and Lyna's message to you were especially powerful. I also want to mention a little difference in translation here. In English, Lyna refers to him as the Exarch, but in the Japanese, she often uses Oji-chan, which is like a really affectionate / childlike way to referring to a grandfather, so like grandpa in English. I believe the English localization team thought her calling him Exarch fits more with her military background and being more professional, whereas in the Japanese version they wanted to emphasize their father-child relationship. I do think the English version still gets the point across because she does at times still acknowledge him as her grandfather in dialogue, and it's obviously apparent in how they conduct themselves around each other. I also want to add that her calling him grandfather is interesting given there's actually no generation between them in a sense. He adopted her when her parents were killed, so he's her adoptive father, but she came to call him grandfather because of how long he has been around and because of the wisdom he imparted on her growing up. I just wanted to mention that neat little detail. In any case, I wish we could have gotten more, like having her involved in a side story, but I'm happy with what we got. You really feel like these two meant a lot to each other, and I think that's great. The deuteragonist and the villain of the Shadowbringers story, G'raha Tia and Emet-Selch, have some interesting parallels. For one, they are both among the last of their kind of an ancient race trying to revive their legacy. Emet-Selch was responsible for causing the 8th Umbral calamity, while G'raha Tia had the biggest role in undoing it. They both worked towards undoing an apocalypse caused in another time. Then there's of course the connection they both share to the Warrior of Light. They are an integral part in both of their plan to destroy or save the First, and for both of them, Azem / the Warrior of Light plays a huge role in their motivation to do the things that they do. You could also point to some subtle things, like how they both hide under a title until only revealing their true names only at the end of the story, or the similarities in their outfit designs, especially with the color schemes and such. But the most chilling parallel has to be that they both went through a lot of effort to save a single person. It's just that their moral compass was wildly different. Emet-Selch was fine with going through extreme lengths to do it, whereas G'raha Tia was willing to sacrifice only one person, which was himself. That's why one of Emet-Selch's lines is really ironic when you give it more thought.
To think that he went through all this trouble for the sake of a single hero. It's almost admirable in its absurdity.
The irony of course being that he went through the same amount of effort for the exact same thing, and even the same person as I mentioned earlier. I can imagine the writer smiling as she put in that line. Another comment from Emet-Selch that fits G'raha Tia is this one.
And the world faces true annihilation. Do you honestly believe that half your number would sacrifice themselves to save the other? Of course they wouldn't!
Because G'raha Tia was willing to sacrifice himself to save someone else, he was exactly upholding those virtues that Emet-Selch talks about here. You kinda wonder if Emet-Selch didn't admire G'raha Tia in some ways. He certainly did find him fascinating, at least, since I mean, not even the Ascians could figure out time travel in this way. But yeah, it's interesting to observe the similarities between these two. The main differences is that Emet-Selch couldn't let go, as well as his moral compass being much more warped due to his circumstances. I said in my Estinian video that besides the Warrior of Light, Estinian is by far the most powerful of the Scions, owing to his infusion with Nidhogg, and I do think that's very much the case. However, G'raha Tia is very capable in combat in a way that isn't strictly just blowing shit up. The first thing I should mention is that he's the only person in the source, besides the Warrior of Light, to have rejoined an additional time, making him much stronger and granting him a larger pool of internal ether to utilize. Then there is the fact that he's extremely capable at defending, healing, and using destructive magics and can really quickly transition between them. Add on to this the knowledge and spells he retained from his infusion with the Crystal Tower, very powerful spells at his disposal, such as Vanish, Break, a Mass Levitation spell, etc. And you've got probably the single most versatile fighter in all of FF14. Then, as the cherry on top, he's a very competent leader, able to remain composed in under even the most stressful of circumstances, able to issue orders effectively, identify which people to delegate into which roles, things like that, as well as being a solid tactician. So yes, if something stood in my way and I no longer want it standing in my way, then sure, I would rely on Estinian, because in a sense Estinian is kind of like artillery, if you get what I mean. But when it comes to a well-rounded, skilled fighter and someone who is very apt with a slew of tricks up his sleeve, I don't really see a substitute for G'raha Tia. This man is an absolute powerhouse when it comes to capability in combat. I think they really struck gold when they created G'raha Tia. He's a character that just about anyone can enjoy just because of him being that cute, goofy fanboy. But there's also more to him if you wanna look for it, such as the things discussed in this video. That was certainly me on my replay of Shadowbringers. I found myself liking him even more than I already did. I think he's an awesome character. Now, I'll end this video with a little something that has been on my mind, which is that I think G'raha Tia has one of the most fascinating backstories tied to his character. There is so much stuff you could tell there. All that he went through after being awakened following the 8th Umbral Calamity, his struggles after arriving in the 1st, and of course, the adventures he had in there. You even have a bunch of characters you could feature, such as Lyna, Feaul, Minfilia, Ranjit, etc. and kinda expand their stories too. I don't know about you guys, but I would love to see some of that explored in some way. I don't know exactly in what way they could do it, but it would be so cool to see. G'raha Tia spin-off game when? Well, that's it. We're done with the main cast. It took a while, but I'm happy to have done it. Now that I have covered all of them, I can go back and finish my Shadowbringers analysis, since talking about the expansion will be easier when I don't have to discuss all the characters in full. Yet there is still one more character I really feel like discussing. Don't worry, it's no one important though. Have a nice day.
Your ill-begotten power, obtained by exploiting that which is best in us. I shall have it. Your soul and all!